Thinking he was just an old farmer, they sneaked into his land and killed his dog. What they didn't know was that the man they mocked used to be a Marine sniper, and now he's taking aim. In Mexico, a young boy named Miguel lives with his mother Rosa. One warm afternoon, as she prepares food in their small home, Rosa receives a sudden call from her brother Carlos. He explains that a powerful cartel was after him because he stole a large sum of their money. Desperate and terrified, he pleads with her to find the cash that he hid for her and to flee Mexico before it's too late.
Van a querer poner un ejemplo. Van a ir por ti.
Moments after the call ends, the cartel captures Carlos. Their ruthless leader, Mauricio, searches through Carlos's phone and notices Rosa's name among the recent contacts. That alone was enough for him to confirm that she knows something, and without hesitation or mercy, they execute Carlos.
Ganaste el cartel, Carlos. Va a chingar tu familia.
Meanwhile, across the border in Arizona, a retired Marine named Jim spends his days working the dry land near the US-Mexico border. He keeps a close eye on his property and frequently alerts Border Patrol whenever he spots anyone crossing illegally. One day while tending to his cattle, Jim notices a small group of people sneaking across the desert and immediately reports it. Out of curiosity, he follows them from a distance and discovers one man left behind with a badly injured leg. The others, unable to carry him, have abandoned him to his fate. Jim radios the man's location to Border Patrol and then quietly returns home.
Hanson here. Better send a medic out. Found one left behind. Over.
Back at his ranch, Jim's problems continue to pile up. A bank representative reminds him of the payments he still owes. Since he hasn't paid in 6 months, the banker warns that his property will soon be put up for auction. Jim has been struggling financially ever since his wife's long illness drained his savings and left him buried in debt. Now the bank threatens to seize his home unless he can come up with the money, and Jim pleads for more time, explaining that he just needs a chance to get back on his feet. The man finally tells him that he has 90 days to figure something out, or they're gonna come and take away his home.
I'm no deadbeat. I just need a little time to sort things out, get back on track.
Later, Jim sets out to look for work, but the man at the employment office tells him the position isn't suited for someone his age. Still, he promises to try and find another job that might fit him better next month, and refusing to give up, Jim drives to a local cattle buyer, hoping to sell a few animals he still owns. The offer he receives is discouragingly low, barely enough to cover a fraction of his debt. Even selling everything wouldn't fix his situation, and exhausted and disheartened, Jim ends his long day at a nearby bar, hoping that a drink or two might ease the constant weight pressing on his mind. The bartender, concerned by his tired expression, calls his stepdaughter Sarah, who works for Border Patrol, to let her know something might be wrong with him. Sarah soon arrives and sits beside him, and they talk quietly for a while, and Jim finally admits that he's been drowning in debt and is on the verge of losing his home. As the night goes on, he orders another round of drinks, but Sarah stops him and she drives him back to his ranch, making sure he gets home safely. Meanwhile, Rosa and Miguel continue fleeing through the countryside. The next day, near the US-Mexico border, they find a narrow gap in the tall steel fence and try to slip through as the cartel closes in on them. Jim happens to be nearby when he notices the pair moving through the opening, and Rosa, desperate and terrified, pleads with him not to report them. Jim, uncertain but cautious, tells her to seek help from the Border Patrol and begins to make a call to report their location. In a while, several armed men led by Mauricio arrive, demanding that he hand the two over. Realizing the danger that they were in, Jim makes a quick decision to protect them instead. Gunfire breaks out almost immediately, and Jim manages to shoot one of the attackers and speeds away in his truck with Rosa and Miguel, while Mauricio and his men chase after them across the desert. During the chase, Mauricio climbs onto Jim's truck, but Jim manages to throw him off before he can take control. When Mauricio discovers that the man Jim shot was his own brother, his rage grows even stronger. The mission stops being about recovering the stolen money at this point and becomes something personal. Now Mauricio's goal is not only to find Miguel, but also to take revenge for his brother's death.
Tu hermano está muerto.
As they flee, Jim realizes that Rosa had been hit by a bullet. She was badly wounded, her breathing uneven and her voice weak. With her remaining strength, she hands Jim a small folded note, an address in Chicago, explaining that it belongs to her relatives. She begs him to take Miguel there and warns that if the cartel finds the boy, they will kill him. And moments later, she passes away. Later, police and paramedics arrive at the scene. Sarah, now aware of what happened, tells Jim that Miguel will stay at the station overnight and be placed in foster care the following day. The next morning, Jim wakes up in his truck near the border checkpoint with his dog Jackson lying beside him. He notices a familiar vehicle parked nearby, the same one the cartel used the previous day. Inside his truck, he finds a bag Rosa left behind and opens it to discover it filled with cash. As he looks at the blood-stained fabric, memories of Rosa dying beside him return in sharp detail. The money no longer feels like a way out of his problems, and it now represents her final wish, a duty that he cannot ignore. Remembering her last plea, he starts his engine and drives back to find Miguel.
God damn it.
Jim hurries to the border station to check on the boy. When he arrives, an officer informs him that Miguel was about to be handed over to his supposed relatives in Mexico, but something felt wrong. Looking through the window, Jim immediately recognizes the men outside. Keeping calm, he asks the officer for a few minutes to speak with Miguel alone. The officer agrees and allows him inside, and once in the room, Jim acts quickly. He quietly leads Miguel down the hallway, slipping out a side door without drawing attention. Together they disappear into the sunlight, beginning their escape once more. Outside, Mauricio stands silently in the parking lot, watching as Jim's truck disappears into the distance with the boy. His expression hardens with anger, and in that moment, he decides what must be done. He will cross into the United States, track them down, and kill them both. Back in Arizona, Jim stops briefly at his ranch. He gathers a few clothes, weapons, and what little cash he has left, and then prepares to leave. When he returns to his vehicle, he realizes that Miguel has run off. At the same time, Mauricio and his men begin crossing the border illegally. The border officer who spots them hesitates, recognizing immediately that these men are cartel enforcers. Fearful for his life, the officer allows them to pass without resistance. Unfortunately, Jim finds Miguel not far from the ranch and warns him that if those men catch him, they will kill him without mercy. And together, they set off toward Chicago.
Doing what your mother asked. I'm taking you to your family in Chicago.
As they drive, Jim tells Miguel that he is taking him to Chicago, but the boy remains silent. Jim assumes Miguel cannot understand him, and meanwhile, after crossing into the United States, Mauricio drives directly to Jim's property. He breaks into the house and searches every room until he finds several credit card receipts and an old Marine Corps badge. The discovery reveals everything he needed to know, and Jim was not just a rancher but a trained Marine, which makes him a far more dangerous opponent. Mauricio pockets the badge and orders his men to burn the house down, and moments later, the property is engulfed in flames. Jim stops at a gas station to refuel and buys a paper map to help navigate toward Chicago. Using the credit card receipts, Mauricio begins coordinating with cartel members already working inside the United States, and Jim later calls Sarah and learns that his ranch had been destroyed by the cartel.
We sent agents up to your house. It was burned to the ground.
Furious, he argues out loud in the car until Miguel quietly responds in English. Jim was surprised, realizing that the boy understood him all along. Miguel admits that he doesn't want to be there, and Jim tells him that he is doing what is best and explains that they are heading to his family in Chicago.
I don't even want to be in your stupid country.
However, the credit card payment Jim made at the gas station gives away his location. Mauricio receives the alert within minutes and races there with his men. When they arrive, Mauricio enters calmly and questions the cashier about where Jim went. When she refuses to help, claiming she doesn't know anything, without hesitation, Mauricio draws his gun and shoots her before leaving. After reviewing the gas station's security footage, Mauricio discovers that Jim is traveling east. Later, Jim's truck breaks down and he takes it to a nearby garage. The mechanic apologizes, saying that they're closed for the day, and with nowhere else to go, Jim takes Miguel to a small diner nearby, and for the first time they truly talk. They introduce themselves properly, and Jim asks why those men were after him. Miguel explains that his uncle got into some serious trouble with the cartel, and now they're being hunted because of him. And when Jim asks about his father, Miguel quietly says that he died before he was born. And that night, they end up sleeping inside Jim's truck.
Jim.
The next morning, Jim wakes up and finds that Miguel and Jackson were gone, and a moment of panic sets in before he sees them returning with groceries Miguel had bought nearby. Relieved, Jim gets his truck repaired and they continue their journey.
If I were you, I'd get the whole thing replaced when you get back home, wherever home is.
Jim and Miguel drive using the map he bought earlier, and Mauricio and his men are soon alerted to Jim's current location after he pays for the car repair, and they head in that direction. On the road, Jim and Miguel begin growing closer, talking about Jim's own trip to Chicago when he was young. Their moment of calm is interrupted when a police car appears behind them, flashing its lights and signaling for them to pull over. The officer approaches and asks for Jim's identification. Jim remains composed, explaining that he's carrying a legally registered firearm and can show the paperwork to prove it. The officer, however, appears suspicious and takes the gun, saying he also wants to question the boy in the vehicle. Uneasy, but cooperative, Jim agrees and follows the officer toward the patrol car.
Go ahead and have a seat in the back.
Once inside, Jim notices the officer speaking quietly into his phone, trying not to be overheard. It becomes clear at this point that this is not a normal traffic stop. Jim realizes the man is stalling for time, likely coordinating with the cartel. He asks the officer how much he was being paid to betray his badge. When the officer pulls out his gun, Jackson jumps at him, and together they fight him off. Without hesitation, Jim knocks the officer unconscious and runs back to the truck and drives away before the cartel arrive.
Miguel, back in the truck, now!
A short while later, Mauricio and his men reach the scene. They find the officer barely conscious and demand to know where Jim went, but he couldn't give them an answer. In frustration, Mauricio shoots him dead. While searching the area, he finds Jim's road map and takes it with him, and from a distance, Jim and Miguel watch everything unfold.
What is it? Where? I don't know!
Later, Jim stops at a gun shop to buy a shotgun. He calls Sarah and learns that the person he shot was Mauricio's brother. Sarah urges him to bring the boy back, and Jim reluctantly agrees. As night falls, he and Miguel check into a small motel to rest. During the evening, they talk more and begin to understand each other better.
When we get to Chicago, the first thing I want to do is eat a hot dog.
And a few hours later, Jim wakes and takes Jackson outside for air. The moment he steps onto the cool night, he spots Mauricio and his men nearby. Jim hurries back to the room and quietly wakes Miguel and calls the police to report a false robbery, hoping to draw attention away. He helps the boy climb out the window and they move through the darkness into the nearby bushes.
Jesus! You killed my brother!
Moments later, the cartel burst into the motel room, finding it empty, and furious, Mauricio shouts into the night, promising to find Jim. Jim tells Miguel to wait in the truck while he goes back for Jackson, but by the time he returns it was too late, and Jackson, loyal as ever, has faced Mauricio head-on, barking to protect his owner. But Mauricio raises his gun and kills him without hesitation. And it is here we hear the gunfire echoing throughout the night. The next morning, Jim and Miguel bury the dog in a quiet patch of land near the motel, marking the spot with a few stones. Later, Miguel confronts Jim after seeing the money in the car, accusing him of helping only for that reason. Hurt, Jim denies it, but Miguel storms off. Soon after, the boy returns and they both apologize before continuing their journey.
I hope someday there's a funeral for my mother.
Not long after, they stop at a small church, and Miguel kneels at the altar, murmuring a prayer for his mother, while Jim stands silently behind him. When the priest approaches and gently asks if Miguel is his grandson, Jim softly answers that he is not, explaining that he promised the boy's mother he would keep him safe.
No, I knew his mother. She asked me to look after him.
Later, Jim calls Sarah to tell her what was happening, and she pleads with him to hand Miguel over to the authorities, warning that things are becoming far too dangerous. But, unfortunately, Jim refuses, and he made a promise to Rosa, and he intends to keep it no matter what the cost might be. He explains to Sarah that he is heading to Chicago to deliver the boy safely to his relatives.
So, what'd he say? Where's he headed?
I don't know.
As Jim and Miguel continue toward Chicago, Mauricio and his men keep searching for any clue that might reveal their location. Eventually, they find Jim's map in their car. On it, a red circle is drawn around Chicago, confirming their destination. Mauricio immediately contacts cartel members already based in the city, ordering them to be ready when Jim and the boy arrive.
Hello. Yeah. No problem.
Sometime later, Miguel finds Jim practicing with his rifle, and curious, he joins him, and Jim begins teaching him how to aim and shoot accurately and take apart and reassemble the weapon. Miguel tells him that when he grows up, he plans to kill those men for what they did, and Jim looks at him firmly and tells him that there is nothing exciting or noble about killing another person. He reminds him that his mother gave her life so that he could have a better one.
Your mother died to give you a chance at a better life. Don't waste it.
That night, Jim and Miguel take shelter beneath an old overpass. To stay warm, they light a small fire, feeding it with bundles of cartel money. The cash no longer matters to them, but survival does. By the next morning, they finally reach the outskirts of Chicago. While driving along a highway, Jim notices two suspicious men watching from an overpass above. He recognizes the danger immediately, and to protect Miguel, he turns off the main road and drives into the countryside, hoping to draw their pursuers away from the city. The cartel cars close in fast, and one vehicle pulls up beside them, and Jim swerves sharply, sending it crashing into the trees. He realizes the truck's radiator is failing. He keeps driving until they reach a remote open area, and then stops the vehicle. Driving on his military experience, Jim takes up a position with his rifle, steadies his breath, and fires. His shot hits the driver of Mauricio's car, flipping it off the road, and the vehicle crashes violently, leaving only Mauricio and two of his men crawling from the wreck. One of them opens fire toward Jim's position, and Jim grabs Miguel and pulls him along as they run toward an abandoned farmhouse nearby. They slip into a dusty old shed where Jim positions himself near a cracked window, and he tells Miguel that if anything happens to him, he must run as fast and as far as possible. Through the broken glass, Jim spots one of the cartel men approaching, and he steadies his rifle once again, squeezes the trigger, and drops the man instantly, and only two enemies remain. Acting quickly, Jim tells Miguel to stay inside and fire into the air to draw their attention. As the sound of gunfire echoes across the field, Jim moves quietly around to the side of the building. The distraction works, and when one of the other men step out into the open, Jim steadies his aim and takes the shot, killing him instantly. And now, only the leader, Mauricio, remains. Moments later, Mauricio breaks into the shed and grabs Miguel, pressing a gun to the boy's